What is the total spending under the governor's current budget proposal?
The spending number for reaching a grand bargain is...
No. I just want the number. How much is it?
The spending number?
The spending number.
The recommended governor's budget is $37.3 billion.
What's the revenues for fiscal year 18 that you anticipate? Given, right now, no legislation, no assumptions. How much is it?
Right. As you know, under current state law...
Real quick, what's the number?
Under current state law, we're required to project revenues, and that projection is $32.7 billion.
What's the delta?
The difference between those two numbers are $4.5 billion.
How do you anticipate getting up to that level? $4.6 billion. How do you plan on getting from your revenues to your expenditures?
Again,
in terms of revenues, do you plan on increasing revenues? Is that part of your plan?
The governor has said from day one that he is open to new revenues.
So he wants to raise taxes then, is that true?
Madam Chair, I wonder if the witness could be allowed to answer the question before he gets two more.
I apologize.
Please?
I'll ask Gary a simple question.
Thank you.
You can answer me in a yes or no format so that we can speed along the process. Is it true that there's a difference between the expenditures and the revenues?
The governor's proposed...
I'm sorry, is it true that there's a difference between the expenditures and the revenues of about $4.6 billion? Is that correct?
The governor's introduced budget...
It's $4.6 billion.
His preferred option is to enact structural changes with the help of the General Assembly, with spending reductions, and to allow new revenues to be part of the solution for the balanced budget.
Do you acknowledge the fact that the governor is going to have to increase revenues to balance the budget?
The governor has also introduced his appropriation bills that are tied to the passage of the Unbalanced Budget Response Act, so that he has the authority to reduce items that are locked into statute, to match spending levels to the projected revenues.
So the governor will sign a revenue increase, is that correct?
No, I'm not saying that at all.
Okay, but he's considering that he would increase revenues, is that correct?
He is open to the idea of increased revenues under a grand bargain approach that includes enacting structural changes to grow the economy.
Let's talk about this grand bargain. How much input has the governor had in this grand bargain so far?
He has introduced last year's budget and this year's budget with that approach as his preferred option.
He's introduced the budget?
Yes.
Legislatively he's introduced the budget, or just more along the lines of communicating his vision? Has he filed the bill? I'm asking about this year.
Yes, we filed appropriation bills yesterday, supplied them to legislative staff.
Who's filing them for you? Who's the sponsor?
It'd be Leader Radonio.
Leader Radonio, okay. Does that include a tax rate increase in that legislation?
No.
It does not.
No, the appropriation bills that are filed are tied to the passage of the Unbalanced Budget Response Act.
So there will be no tax bill in your guys' budget plan then to increase the revenues?
The governor does not want to just solely increase taxes by itself. That past approach has not worked. It has only gotten Illinois into more trouble. The governor, again, believes the most important thing is to improve the economy, to add jobs, that's going to be the long-term solution for the budget. And that is his proposal. He introduced a budget book yesterday. It's 570 pages, and it provides that path to a balanced budget.
Wonderful. So he makes a lot of assumptions, the governor. He assumes that the grand bargain will pass. And so my first question was, how much input of this grand bargain has the governor made? And you failed to answer the question. You failed to answer. How much input has he had in the grand bargain? Has he helped out? Has he came up with any of these ideas? Has he crafted the legislation?
There were working groups last summer and even in the fiscal year 2016 budget that provided input with the General Assembly on those policy considerations for various structural changes. So yes, there was quite a bit of input.
So budgeting, you got to take into consideration all the external factors that could happen. What happens if the grand bargain doesn't move forward? How much would that cost? How much in addition would that cost to the state? How much would that be?
I don't have that figure off the top of my head, but the governor would
It should
then
be in your budget because you assumed that the grand bargain would pass. So if it doesn't pass, you just back that number out, right?
No, the governor has introduced appropriation bills for the Unbalanced Budget Response Act that would allow him to effectively reduce spending to available current revenue, so there would be no deficit. The budget is balanced.
In the budget book, is there a caveat called working together, grand bargain?
Yes, that is discussed in the budget book.
How much do you estimate in savings in the budget book for grand bargain working together?
The governor's introduced budget has its savings proposals of $3 billion that I outlined in my overview.
Okay, so the question I just asked you was, how much do you anticipate that it would increase the spending if there wasn't a grand bargain? And now you just told me that there's grand bargain numbers inside the budget book. Is that correct?
The governor's introduced budget assumes that it would be a mixture of three things, which would be enacting structural changes, growing the economy, as well as additional spending reductions and new revenues.
I understand that. I asked you a question about the grand bargain and how much it would save. You told me you didn't have the number. I asked you if in the budget book, working together, there was a caveat called the grand bargain and how much it would save. And how much would it save?
Again,
$3 billion, is that right? What was the number? I just want to know the number.
there are savings proposals of $3 billion.
Okay, so if the grand bargain doesn't pass, something happens where it doesn't pass in that current form, that $3 billion would be backed out. Is that correct?
If none of those proposals pass, yes, the
And what
savings
would
would not be able to be
that-
achieved.
Thank you. The aggregate number then would be what? How much would the total spending of the state would be if the grand bargain doesn't pass?
The maintenance autopilot budget, if there were no changes in law, would have a deficit of $7.2 billion. But the governor has requested authority from the Unbalanced Budget Response Act to balance the budget. If the governor is given that authority to make spending reductions, the state will be in much better spot than letting the status quo continue and having courts and consent decrees dictate spending.
Thank you. Let's just go over a couple of the subparagraphs here so I can make sure I can tell my constituents back in the district what the governor actually proposed. Higher education. What's the governor's proposal for higher education?
The proposed funding level for higher education is $1.8 billion.
And then what was it last year?
In fiscal year 2016, $600 million.
What was the total expenditures last year? Are you increasing the spending on higher education or decreasing the spending?
Going from the 15 level, going from, yes, the 15 level
Let's
to...
go from 17. Let's start from 17 to 18. What's it going to be?
We do not have a full budget in place yet for FY17.
Okay.
Right now, higher education is funded at $1 billion, so it would be an $825 million increase.
Let's talk about maintenance, right? You said maintenance. What would the maintenance budget be on higher education?
For FY17?
For FY18?
For FY18, it would be $1.95 billion.
Define maintenance for me. What does maintenance mean?
That is based upon what the requests we've received from various agencies, and the introduced budget for the governor for 18 assumes a 10% reduction for higher ed.
Thank you. 10% reduction for higher ed. Okay.
For universities and community colleges.
Let's talk about human services really quick. What would maintenance be for human services for fiscal year 18?
$6.2 billion.
$6.2 billion. What's the governor's proposed?
$5.9 billion.
What's the reduction there?
It's about $230 million.
Okay. I'm going to end my comments here just by asking a couple questions about the governor is a jobs governor. That's what at least he told us. So what are the current backlog of bills again?
Today, the comptroller's website is showing $11.9 billion.
Okay, and then it seems basic to us as legislators because we're here and we do the job. So can you tell people at home what's included in the backlog of bills? Just a general, what's included in these bills?
Those are payments for state employee group health insurance, as well as state agency operations, as well as Medicaid payments, as well as payments to schools, as well as transfers to other state funds, as well as transfers to local governments.
So just to be clear, because some of them don't understand what transfers to local government and all these different things are. So is it, just to be clear, so is it true that goods and services that Illinois buys and provides, is that included in some of these back bills? Some of the goods and services that we buy and provide?
That is correct.
So that has direct impact on private vendors who do business with the state, is that right?
Yes, any payment delay would have an impact on a business.
So those private vendors, they hire regular, ordinary workers. That would have an impact on them, those back bills.
Yes, any payment delay would have an impact on a business.
Would you say that because we haven't had a certainty of a budget for 2 years now, that might have impacted the jobs of those vendors that are owed money?
I would say that if the governor's proposed budget in fiscal year 2016 were enacted, the state would be in much better shape today.
That last year he didn't propose, he wasn't willing to sign a revenue. He never proposed revenue, did he, in fiscal year 16?
If the governor's proposal with savings reforms and reaching a grand bargain, the state would be in much better place today.
That's this year, but 16 you were just talking about.
In fiscal year 17.
Fiscal year 17 then, but we're in fiscal year 18 we're talking about right now, is that right?
The same
so
applies.
Which one, what are you talking about, 16 or 18 or 17? Which one?
All three.
All three. So in 16, right? You said if his proposal in 16 was enacted, then we'd be in a far better position than we were, right? Is that what you just said?
That's correct.
Okay, so what happened in 16? Did he propose cuts in 16?
He proposed over $6 billion in cuts.
$6 billion in cuts. Okay. Let's talk about a little bit more about procurement. How much do you estimate you'd save in procurement reform?
I believe that was $340 million.
Okay, so in this, I'm sorry, 340 million, is that what you said?
That's correct. That's statewide. That would be including higher education savings.
Okay. GRF is how much in procurement reform? How much do you plan on saving from that?
$160 million.
160 million? Okay. So according to the procurement reform proposal, that's part of the grand bargain that the Senate came up with, not the governor, we've identified about $85 million in savings. So what's your formula for capturing that delta?
So the governor's proposed budget would include reallocating some of the savings that would be accruing to other state funds to be transferred to the general revenue fund to bridge that gap.
Interesting. And the last one, which is near and dear to my heart, and I'll stop after this. What's the governor's proposal to the local government distributive fund?
No changes.
No changes at all.
Correct.
So you can confirm right now that the governor will assure towns across Illinois that the local government distributive fund won't be zeroed out.
Not with the governor's proposal.
So the governor proposes that he will not zero out the local government distributive fund.
Not in the governor's preferred proposal as far as working with the General Assembly on a grand bargain.
Thank you very much.
All right, we have a number of other folks who want to ask questions. I have Senator